Hello, and welcome back to the Financial Thought Exchange podcast, where you get a little wiser by learning from the leading thinkers in finance. I am your host, Lotta Moberg, and with me, I have two guests that are very popular, and they are recurring because we keep discussing their piece that they wrote for us called Lifetime Financial Advice, a personalized, optimal, multi-level approach. I have with me today Thomas Idzorek. He's a Chief Investment Officer of Retirement for Morningstar Investment Management. And Paul Kaplan, now retired, but he was formerly Director of Research for Morningstar Canada. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us back.
Thank you.
So if you haven't already, please do go back and listen to the two episodes that we've already recorded and broadcasted on their piece. It's a great piece. It's a very in-depth piece on lifetime financial advice, and I think listening to the videos in order is the good thing to do, the best thing to do. So let's start now getting into even more meat of the technicals here and understanding how we build out a model for lifetime advice. Very core concept here is utility maximization. You really discuss financial planning as a utility maximizing exercise. Can you explain this concept, what it means?
Yes. So utility maximization is foundational to most of economics, including finance. However, not everyone is familiar with it, that works in the field. So we wanted to spend some time in chapter 3 of our book to really lay the foundation. What is utility maximization, so that then in later chapters we can build on it to show how people ought to make decisions over time, how they to manage their portfolios, and also how they might want to buy life insurance and annuities. So to start things off, we start off with a very simple example. We imagine somebody goes to a party, and at this party there's pizza and there's beer. However, the host, to defray the cost of the party, is asking each participant to pay something for it, and so the pizza is $2 a slice, and the beer is $4 a glass, and this person has $20 in their pocket, so they can only spend $20. So the question was, how much beer and how much pizza are they going to buy? That all depends upon their preferences for these two goods. So they come to the party fairly thirsty. So the first thing they do is they buy a glass of beer. And then after that, they might buy another glass of beer. And then they're starting to feel a little hungry. So they get they have a slice of pizza, and then another slice of pizza, and so on. And, they go back and forth between buying pizza and buying beer, based upon their preferences. And so at the end of the day, they end up spending buying 3 glasses of beer and four slices of pizza. They spent their $20. They're done. So the idea is that every person, coming into a situation like this where they have to make choices, has preferences. And in addition to preferences, they also face what we call a budget constraint. In this case, $20. So so at one end of the budget constraint, they can buy just beer. At the other budget constraint, they could buy just pizza. And what they want to do is find the combination that gives them the most, what economists call utility, or we could say makes them the happiest. What they can do, subject to the constraint that they only have that $20. And this chart is a chart that's straight out of any microeconomics textbook. The goods are probably not pizza and beer. They're probably 2 other things. But the idea is always the same, that finding the combination which gives me the most happiness, and while being constrained to spend no more than the money that I have.
Paul, can I jump in and emphasize, what you just said? It's a Lotta, you had asked, what is utility maximization? And what Paul just said is, Yeah, I feel like the word utility can scare some people away. Again, what the people are maximizing is their happiness, what they might think of as their satisfaction with how they're spending or using their money in the presence of a budget. Paul.
Thanks.
Okay, then we go on. We say, well, suppose there's someone else comes to this party, but this person comes to the party more hungry than they are thirsty, and so but they also come with $20, and what they're going to do, if we go to the next slide, is get a different combination of pizza and beer. This time they're hungry, so they're emphasizing more on the pizza side. But they are also subject to a budget constraint. So they're maximizing their utility or their happiness or their satisfaction, however you choose to describe it, under the same principle.
And what we're seeing here, right, is this line that is a straight line that symbolizes the budget constraint, right? Which shows that you can buy, I think it's 10 units of only one thing or a certain amount of units of the other. And then you can combine those baskets. What do we mean by why does it say indifference curve? We talked about utility. Why is it an indifference?
So an indifference curve is a set of combinations or bundles of goods in which the person is equally happy with. So look at that last one. The one that's to the most the right, that's most to the right. And most upward.
Light blue one, I think it is. Yeah.
So that one shows any point along that curve, they're equally happy. So in other words, people are willing to the idea is that people are willing to substitute one good for another, and they can do so at the same level of utility or happiness. Now, you'll notice how we drew three curves there. So the one above it, the top one we were just talking about, doesn't touch the budget constraint at all. So we say that those would be infeasible combinations. And then the very bottom one, more to the left and bottom, it has a similar shape, but it intersects the budget constraint at 2 points. And in this case, you're equally happy along any point along that curve, but you can do better because you haven't really, if you spend your money on that middle section of that curve, you haven't spent all your money. You still have cash in your pocket. So the idea is where you go for is that one, the optimal bundle, the one right in the middle. That curve is just tangent to the line, and that's the point that maximizes utility.
Thanks, that's helpful. This one?
Okay, so now we're gonna apply the same principle in a few different ways, and this is really laying the foundation of life cycle finance. So the two goods can really be good at anything. They could be pizza and beer, but they can also be consumption this year versus consumption next year. And in which case, I still face a budget constraint because let's suppose there's a riskless asset, and I could invest in that riskless asset, earn interest, and have money for the future to buy something in the future, but I would have to sacrifice giving up money today. Or I can, or I can buy more today and have less in the future. Or if there's a kind of a dotted 45-degree line going through there, that's along that line is you would equally hold the same amount in both this year and next year. So this, of course, is getting at the fundamental concept of saving, kind of at savings and investing, because why do you save? Why do you save your money before you retire? You're saving your money before you retire so you can invest it and have more money while you're retired to spend on the things that you like. So this very simple example really contains within it the fundamental principle of life cycle finance.
So why would the optimal consumption across time not always be consumption smoothing that we mentioned before, meaning I will consume today what I also consume tomorrow? I wouldn't want to eat 5 hamburgers today and only 1 tomorrow. I would want, more 3 each day rather.
Yeah. So I think on the next slide, it gives a simple illustration of that. Yeah. So what this basically says is that let's suppose the rate of return on your investment was 5%. And let's suppose that you're what's called the subjective discount rate. That's how much subjectively I discount the consumption in the future, because, for most people have a preference to have money today, rather than having to wait for it. Sometimes economists will refer to this as, investors are impatient. They want their money now. They don't want to have to wait. But if the market was giving you a high enough rate of return to make you want to wait, then that's in the situation in which you actually would consume the same amount in both periods, which is what this chart shows. Okay. On the other hand, if the market return were a lot higher, let's say, than your subjective rate, then you would go the other way. You'd want to consume more now than in the future. And in the last case, it's basically a situation where the market return is a lot less than your subjective rate of return, in which case you would reduce your consumption in the future. So it all depends upon the interaction between your preferences on the one hand, and in this case, preferences between consumption today versus consumption in the future, versus what kind of returns is the market offering.
So when we think about this personal discount rate, what is the difference between that rate and the discount rate that most people in finance will be familiar with? Is the discount rate you use to discount future cash flows to come up with the net present value?
The difference is that the kind of discount rates that we use to discount future cash flows are set in the market. Basically, we look at the capital markets and we see how risky our cash flows are, and from that we say, well, what's the expected return that's relevant to discounting those cash flows versus the subjective discount rate, which is, how do I feel about it's subjective. It's a feeling. It's how do I feel about consumption in the future versus consumption today. And later in the book, we explain how the subjective discount rate is used to discount future utility, future levels of happiness, versus when you're calculating a net present value of some cash flow, it's a market determined rate of return.
Great.
Okay, so so now we're moving on to the next application, which is dealing with uncertainty. Now, this one gets a little bit more abstract, because the fact is, when you think about investing, what do you think about? You think about, well, what asset classes I should invest in, what should my asset allocation be? And we do get to that, but the foundational principle behind it, it's the same as pizza versus beer. It's the same as consumption today versus consumption in the future. It's under different states. It's consumption in a down market versus consumption, let's say, in an up market. Now, theoretically, what economists like to assume is that I could go to the market and I could buy a contract that says if the market is down, to deliver, then I will take delivery of a certain amount of money. If the market is up, I will take a delivery of a certain amount of money. Or the way I like to illustrate it is that what economists basically assume is that I can go to the market right now and I can buy a contract that will deliver me one umbrella this coming Tuesday if it's raining. Right? So that's called complete market. So what I'm showing here in this chart is really just the conceptual. But as we move on, we will find that this conceptual idea does have a translation into actual portfolios, and we can actually talk about asset allocation.
Yeah, it's a great to get a glimpse of this picture, just kind of to make the point that it is going to be a bit more complicated because there is uncertainty in the market, and that is a lot of, that's what portfolio construction is about. So we'll circle back to that when we have more of the foundations behind that, I think. So when we think about the discount rate then of any person, how much is that? Again, I'm thinking, like, if you would ask me for the rest of your life, would you like to consume 6 hamburgers now and 1 in the future, or 3 every day? I would say 3 every day, right? Well, that doesn't add up, but you know what I mean. So how much is that discount rate really only a risk premium? It's a matter of, I want to consume more today because actually I don't know if I'm going to be around. Something might happen. Something might make me make a lot of money, so I should invest in, like, consume more today. That might be a calculation. But how much is it really a preference for consuming more now? Are we like these gluttonous, impatient people? Is that what we're trying to model here?
Lotta, my guess is people that are wanting to live in the moment, to maximize their happiness now, and they more or less, again, unfortunately, don't care about the future. And conversely, you probably know of people that are, living very frugally at this moment, saving for that trip of the future, that grand retirement. And so, again, I don't know that people have their hands necessarily around what kind of consumption pattern they really want, but it's, important to explore. And I think as a base case, again, like kind of the preferences that you articulated, most of us probably do want, real consumption throughout our lives, but others do have, a clear preference for now versus later, or later versus now.
Yeah, and I think also, what you're getting at is basically kind of how these two different sets of preferences come together. Because on the one hand, I have a subjective discount rate. It's about how impatient I am, how I prefer consumption today versus in the future. But then there's also another piece of that, which is my risk tolerance, which is what we were getting at on the last chart, which is, how do I feel about the uncertainty of how much I'm going to get paid tomorrow, and those two things intersect. And it is complicated. And in fact, we don't, what we do in the book, in chapter 5, we focus entirely on the impatience. We assume a market which pays a constant rate of return. And then we also add into that mortality. What's the probability of being alive at different points in the future? And we introduce, so we address questions like not only how much should people consume today versus tomorrow, but also how much life insurance should they buy, how much annuities they should buy once they're retired, and things like that. It's not until chapter 6 that we actually bring together both the preferences regarding consumption over time, together with risk tolerance preferences over, regarding riskiness.
And what I might add is, life is complicated, right? There is a large set of trade-offs that one is attempting to make it. And what life cycle finance enables one to do is to make that complicated, interconnected set of trade-offs in an optimal way.
Well, it's important for our listeners to also know that when we are actually thinking about what should be the consumption path over time, one parameter there is that personal discount factor, right? If it's higher, that means that you want to consume more and less tomorrow. That might be unintuitive. It is kind of unintuitive for me, and it might be for others too. When you think about, if you think about a wealth advisor, you would think that it's not that person's task to smooth consumption, help you get over that impatience, and tell you that you will be better off if you say more now so that you can consume more in the future. Why would that even be a parameter that goes in there, as opposed to something that should not go in there? You have to explain to somebody why we're not allocating according to your impatience.
You see, I might abstract it even more. I think that the terms that economists have chosen to use within life cycle finance, these are unintuitive terms. The names are not well specified, but again, almost, like for people that listen to music, there's an audio equalizer where they can change, a number of different settings, and they may not even know the label of what the knob that they're changing, but they're able to kind of hear a difference and they find that more preferable. Again, I guess I think of this as, how do we actually measure somebody's preference? That's a hard thing, but what we would like to do is, back into those preferences. And then once we've understood those preferences, then we have the complicated machinery and models to make those the interconnected trade-offs in the best possible way.
Tom, maybe you can talk a little bit about chapter 2, about the framework in chapter 2, whether, how do you design questions for the investor to get at these different dimensions?
Right. So I will say in chapter 2, we put forth, and I think we admittedly say these are some kind of bad attempts at, how do you get to these preferences? And so in the world of risk tolerance, right, there's revealed risk, preference kind of systems. There are risk tolerance questionnaires. And in chapter 2, we put forth, what could be questions for trying to reveal what somebody's preference, what these other preferences are that people have. And again, admittedly, since I don't think our questions are very good, but for those people that are specialists in revealing the preferences that people have, I think that systems could be designed like the audio equalizer example that I'm giving that would assist people in advisors, planners, in assessing those preferences and then using those preferences in the models to come up with optimal financial advice.
So how do we think of, like, if you sit in front of somebody and say, well, because of your discount rate might be this, we're going to have you have a negative growth of your consumption over time. Does that like chime with people? Is that intuitive for you?
Well, intuitive, I don't think I would describe that as intuitive to me, but I think you would be, talking about, based on the way maybe you've responded to certain things, it seems as if you want to consume more now and consume less later. And then I think it's always important for advisors and planners to have a conversation in intuitive terms. I wouldn't be using any of the words of economics. Again, does this make sense that you feel like maybe you don't think you're going to live long? I don't know. Maybe you just really like to live in the moment and you want to consume more now. Conversely, the way you're answering these questions, it really seems as if you would prefer to live, frugally now in hopes of a better retirement. Does that, as I describe that to you, does that make sense to you? Does that jive with how you feel? And then again, if it does not, again, it may very well be that after that conversation around a given preference that you've moved that back to, we'll call it a neutral setting, right? Where somebody is attempting to really consume consumption throughout their life.
Yeah, you also remember, whether you increase consumption, decrease consumption, or stay the same, remember from our earlier illustration, that has to do with, what is your subjective rate of your subjective discount rate versus what you think the market is going to provide.
Yeah. In this vein, I noted the quote from your piece that the investor should schedule or plan lifetime consumption that is somewhat greater in the upcoming years and somewhat less in their later years because the likelihood of being alive decreases over time. So it kind of makes me wonder, you sit in there having the conversation with someone and say, well, you might be dead then anyway, so let's plan for you to consume less. So those are the kind of things that it makes me go, is this how it works in real life?
Yeah, that what you're quoting, that's when we're talking about what happens to an investor who does not buy annuities.
Okay.
If you don't buy annuities,
then
the probability of you still being alive at age 100 is probably pretty low, and so you probably aren't going to plan to have a lot of consumption on it. But if you can buy annuities, that changes everything, because then you can guarantee your income over the rest of your life, regardless of you don't have to worry about longevity risk anymore.
That's a very important thing. We're going to get into that topic too. Just to stay on the discount rate, because it's always so fascinating. We usually think of it as, because you made a really important point, Paul, about it's what in relation to the market compared to it. And we often think about, because I have a personal preference, or we assume people have a preference to consume earlier rather than later, then people will consume more earlier rather than later. But if the market, of course, has a higher return than that, or higher discount rate, then they will be the other way around. I wonder when it comes to, if you think about consumption smoothing, and we want to get into that too, but how people think over time of their lifetime income versus their expenditures. I know for myself and many others, like when you're a student, and if you're in a PhD program, your expectation for income is reasonably okay for the rest of your life. Still, you live in a little room for $500, and you don't consume anything, and maybe you'll have a car. It almost seems like it's the other way around, that people's discount rates are so low, and they're always postponing too much consumption.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, because if people behave optimally, they're behaving optimally. There's no such thing as too much or too little. You're just it's whatever is optimal. So, and remember also that when you are talking about people's income and how risky their income is, right now we're talking about human capital. We're not talking about the financial wealth at the moment, right? We're saying, given how much human capital you have, and given how risky your human capital is, then that's what's going to drive your decisions, your asset allocation decisions, in your So that's where this is, this whole discussion about your discount rate. It's now getting kind of intertwined with how risky your human capital is.
So let's get into the consumption smoothing as well. Maybe just explain what we mean by that. I think it's quite intuitive. It's a good word, a clear word for most people. And how does the consumption smoothing parameter interact then with the personal discount rate? How do they kind of come together?
Well, there is no parameter that governs consumption smoothing per se. It's an It's an interaction between your subjective discount rate and the return on the market.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking about it as like, I have a preference for consumption smoothing, and that being a separate thing, but it's really not. No, that makes sense. When we talk about utility maximization, then maybe we should take one step back and give people an overview of what are the main parameters that go into it. What are the most important parts that we want people to keep in their head as we move forward through this?
Well, it's a set of parameters. In the way we present it, actually, we have a 3-parameter model that we use. Wasn't developed by us. We took it from from the economics literature, and the 3 are like we've been talking about: the subjective discount rate on the one hand, risk tolerance on the other, and then the other component is called the elasticity of intertemporal substitution, which is a very wordy name for a parameter, but what it means is that how flexible I am in substituting one let's say consumption over period 1 versus period 2. How flexible am I in substituting one for the other? And that's really getting at those curves that we had earlier, those indifference curves. The shape of those indifference curves is largely driven by that.
And that's what I'm thinking about when I was talking about consumption smoothing. That's exactly what I'm thinking about. That flexibility across time. Am I okay, not spreading the consumption out very smoothly across time. So one thing that comes up with that I am curious about is, you mentioned, this is in chapter 5, you mentioned in your kind of showing in your model that if you have that decline in consumption is faster if your preference for consumption smoothing is higher. Maybe we can get in a little bit more in depth of understanding how, in that way, how consumption smoothing kind of interacts here.
Well, consumption smoothing is not an input to the model; it's an output of the model.
Okay.
So how smooth your consumption is going to be a function. Well, in chapter 5, there's no market risk. So in chapter 5, it's your elasticity of intertemporal substitution, it's your discount rate. That's from the investor side. That's the subjective side of it. And then what's on the more objective side would be like, what's the market? What is the market returning? What kind of market return can you get on your investments? It's the interaction of all three of those that determines your consumption smoothing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So if we're thinking about the consumption side then of this, maybe you can give an overview of how you model the non-discretionary spending and the consumption-related liabilities, which in a way often it's the same overlaps, but and why we're focusing on the non-discretionary as opposed to the discretionary part in the first steps, at least when we're doing this.
Yeah, actually, this is something which kind of comes out of utility theory, which basically says, in order for you to have any utility or happiness, you first have to meet your requirements to, in your non-discretionary consumption. So you have to pay your bills first. I have to, pay my mortgage or my rent, or, I have to pay for food. I have to. So that kind of then sets you up with a starting point. And then anything you do beyond that is what we call discretionary consumption, which is what you're trying to finance, beyond your liabilities. Your liabilities are the present discounted value of your future non-discretionary consumption. So that now we're getting to the elements of what we call the economic balance sheet. Mm-hmm. So just as companies have balance sheets, people have balance sheets too. And on the asset side, you have your financial wealth, what securities you're holding. You have your human capital, that's on the left, and on the right, you have your liabilities, and then what's left over is your net worth. And everything we do focuses on net worth.
Yeah. Can you get into that a little bit more, the concept of net worth, what that actually means then?
And I'll jump in, Paul, and maybe you can add, so to me, when you're thinking about somebody's overall financial health, or a company's financial health, one of the things that you would look at is their balance sheet. And again, what Paul and I are advocating, to some degree, is that financial planners and financial advisors would embrace the concept of an economic balance sheet, and they would actually put that front and center as part of the planning process, and regularly checking in with their clients on how does their balance sheet look, and what is their net worth, and how is that evolving through time. And I would argue that somebody's financial health is depicted by the size of their liabilities. And again, we use the word liabilities. Again, it might be a soft or non-legal liability, but this is really, what we are, I guess, subjectively categorizing as non-discretionary consumption. And we're calculating the net present value of all future consumption. That's forming the basis of the right side of the balance sheet, the liability. And then, as Paul just mentioned, on the left side of that balance sheet, you have your human capital, which we talked about in our last episode, which again would be the net present value of all labor income that you'll earn throughout your life, including Social Security and any sort of defined benefit pension assets. And then that is, one, dictating, I would say, again, your risk capacity as well as your overall financial health. And then in light of those things and your risk preference, we're going to determine how aggressive should your financial assets ultimately be invested.
Right. And so, like you say, we have on the asset side the financial assets, the human capital that we talked about. And then on the liability side, as you both mentioned, we have what we think of as liabilities, financial liabilities. I have to pay my mortgage, and the non-discretionary consumption I cannot control. I'm going to send my kids to college at year such and such, or something like that. That is, everybody can dispute, of course, what is discretionary in life. There's a lot of things you can change in life, but what's left there, right, is the discretionary consumption, which we can kind of think of as our net worth. Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, you can think of net worth as what funds net worth funds your discretionary consumption.
Yeah. Perfect. So when we think about just a model like this, just high level, how should practitioners, when they read your book, think about, this is awesome, I'm learning a lot, now I want to implement it? And I know we're going to hit on this several times, just like think about the implementation side. There's a lot of like these parameters that we're talking about when we're talking about the utility curves and things like that. And it's a subjective assessment that we have to assess from speaking to our clients, if we're a wealth advisor, for example, having read your book and want to implement the ideas, for example. So how do we know, and how secure can we be about and confident about getting it right? Like I'm putting this parameter in here, the risk tolerance parameter and things like that, and therefore really getting to that portfolio that is the correct one. Are we setting some kind of error parameters on it and saying, let's check that we're in the ballpark, or something else, that we're not ending up with some corner solution? Or like, how do we know that we're actually measuring these subjective concepts right?
I'm not talking because I don't know that I have a good answer. Again, as we were somewhat talking about in terms of measuring preferences of individuals, again, I think that's where I think Paul and I would be, calling upon the industry as to say, one, we want to highlight the power of life cycle finance and life cycle models, and they require certain parameters that I'd say advisors and planners are not used to, receiving from their clients or measuring. And again, at the moment, there are not, in my opinion, good systems for measuring, those inputs. But again, I believe that they just as risk tolerant, I think these systems can be every bit as good as systems for measuring risk tolerance. Whether those are truly good systems or not is not, I don't know. Nevertheless, as an industry, we move forward with the estimates of risk tolerance that we get. We'll be able to move forward with the other preferences that we get, and they feed into the model. And then the model, the life cycle models, it's important to remember that almost everything inside of them is stochastic in nature. So that you do have what you might think of as a mean or median estimate of what that economic balance sheet look like. But you also have a complete distribution of balance sheets, of estimates of, all components of the balance sheet. So I would say some form of, I'll call it sensitivity analysis, is almost, built into the fact that the models are accounting for a wide range of distributions to begin with.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about it as in, if most wealth advisors today probably are doing this way more crudely, so to speak, than you are, right? Like you have a risk tolerance measurement, and then you say, okay, well then we're in this ballpark, and it's a lot of like this intuition and visual, which means that you're not as precise as you are in your framework. But then the question is whether there's a risk of people like getting, implementing the framework wrong, because there's when there are more parameters to measure, when it like when it comes to like optimization exercises.
Right.
They're difficult.
Well, I guess,
I'm curious how you think about it.
Well, again, I don't think that, the models that are in the book are something that somebody is going to go into Excel or, the environment of their choice, the advisor, and kind of build them on their own. The reality is that in order to provide better advice, we want to leverage and use the most powerful models that we have at our disposal to help investors, but those are complicated models. Again, I believe that, again, there's kind of a call upon the industry, software manufacturers, if you will, that are assisting investors and advisors to build the systems that, I'd say move away from the economic speak and the terminology that we've been using to fundamentally get at the preferences, regardless of what you call the preferences, and have them feed into software systems essentially automatically to produce ongoing, updated, optimal lifetime advice on behalf of the people. So again, there should be, if done correctly, in my opinion, there should be relatively little, concern of, bad parameterization if the other, preference measurement systems are feeding into an appropriately designed software system.
So let's jump then to one more tool in our toolbox that we've nibbled on a little bit, which is annuities. Maybe one of you can just explain what broadly is the role of annuities in life cycle planning.
Paul, I'll start off and maybe kick it over to you to maybe talk about the specific types of annuities that we're talking about. But so first of all, the word annuity, I think, scares away a lot of people. And in fact, again, if I heard that, somebody was trying to sell an annuity to my sister, I would tell her to take a pause. I want to understand everything real quick. But, there's a wide variety of different types of annuities that could be used in the concept of life cycle finance. We're using the idea of an immediate variable annuity, and that is where somebody would essentially turn over or, make a purchase of an amount of that annuity that will guarantee them income from life for life, and it would be linked to a basket of securities or asset classes, as it might be, and that basket of asset classes might be invested in a conservative asset allocation or an aggressive asset allocation, depending upon the person's situation. But the key component is that you've taken, when you have purchased that, to the degree that you have some of your wealth in an annuity, you are taking longevity risk off the table. Paul, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, that's the key, taking longevity risk off the table. So in Chapter 5, we talk about immediate fixed annuities, where you basically you buy one and it pays you a fixed amount for the rest of your life, guaranteed. Even better if it's inflation, it's inflation adjusted as well. And then as Tom was talking about, the immediate variable annuity, IVA, where it pays you for the rest of your life, but the amount it pays you depends upon how some underlying portfolio of risky assets does. And that in the book, we show that the relevant portfolio of risky assets should be tied to what's happening with your net worth. Now, unfortunately, the word annuity is used in other ways, which makes it confusing. So, for example, there are things called variable annuities, VAs, but they are nothing like immediate variable annuities or IVAs. And so we're not, they're basically investment accounts that pay you, that basically at some point in the future, after you've bought them, you can convert them into a payout annuity. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about these annuity products that are specifically designed to remove longevity risk.
So let's clarify what the type is then. It is a variable in the way that it's tied to a basket of securities, as you mentioned. Would that not be an issue if it's all about, the securing of a stream of cash? What if the market goes down? What happens then? Will I not have anything to live on for a couple of years if the market crashes or something?
Well, it is variable, right? So yeah, if it's tied to like a market index, let's say, then yeah, if the market crashes, that's going to affect your payout. That's going to reduce your payout. But if the market runs up, then that's going to increase your payout.
Right. But it's more like a dividend of the market as a whole. Like a share of it gets paid out. It's not like I'm losing money on when the market goes down.
Well,
So
it's not like it's not like a dividend. It's just it's just basically something that's tied to some tied, the amount of payment goes up and down depending on what happens with the underlying security. Typically with a dividend, the company, even if the market crashes, the company might still be paying out a dividend for a while. Whereas this doesn't work that way. It's just an automatic adjustment based upon the underlying portfolio.
So doesn't that negate the consumption security then, which is the reason to have it in place?
Well, this is where the risk tolerance component comes in, because you are willing. It depends on your risk tolerance. If you're more risk tolerant than the underlying portfolio, again, which is tied to the risk of your net worth, is going to be more variable. But if you have less risk tolerance, then it'll be less variable.
So why are we using, and why are you focusing on at least these kind of annuities as opposed to the ones that people learn about first 101 is fixed annuities? You get a certain amount of dollars every certain period. Why are these?
Well, we talk about both. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there's some discussion of both of those. So it just depends on the situation.
And it depends on the risk tolerance, basically. So some
risk tolerance is part of it.
Ones.
Yeah.
Okay. So broadly then, what is just annuities generally? You touched on it a little bit, but we want to nail this into people's head. What are they for? What's the benefit of ever having an annuity?
The benefit is that you never have to worry. It eliminates longevity risk. Mm-hmm. So I can plan so that's going to be something which is going to lead to a much smoother consumption than you would if you didn't have the annuity. Because like you mentioned earlier in the book, we point out that if you don't have an annuity, you plan on consuming more today than in the future. But if you have an annuity, you can have smooth consumption over your life, no matter how old you get.
Yeah. So
right, and so real quick, so let's say that life expectancy is 83 years old, and I'm just generalizing that. Maybe that's for a particular person, but nowadays we have a number of people that will become centurions. They're going to make it past 100, and of course, paying for a retirement that doesn't just end at 83, but goes to, let's say, 103, an additional 20 years of having to finance or pay for consumption, by purchasing that immediate annuity, perhaps a combination of fixed and variable, both always immediate, they will pay out for as long as that person is alive. And of course, the downside, and the reason I think that many people do not purchase immediate annuities is that concern that I'm 65, I've just exchanged maybe a lump sum in exchange for income for life, but maybe I'll get hit by the bus is the concern. But what's happening is there will be some people that don't make it to 83 in my example, and they are essentially helping to finance those people that make it well past life expectancy.
Right.
And again, for those that have a desire to leave money behind, that portion of their wealth would not be annuitized. And again, what the life cycle models are doing, Paul's getting a call. I think I got a call too, so I can't complain too much. No worries.
Both take a call breaks if you want.
Again, but we were talking about the different preferences. I think we have preferences that are related to consumption, and then there are preferences related to kind of bequest and life insurance, as well as risk tolerance. And all of these preferences are able to be fed into the life cycle models that we've produced, and again, arrive at what would be that optimal interconnected trade-off for a given individual.
So when should people get the annuity then? Is that something that you should plan for right now? If you're young, start thinking about it in advance, buy it now kind of thing? Or is it something that you're better off always just buying it at the start of the period after which you want the fixed income over time, or an income over time secured?
Well, I think that, we think annuities, if you can get them at good prices, are really important because, as Tom was saying, your life expectancy may be 83, but that's only, that is only an average. Nobody knows. You don't know how long you're going to actually live. You might live till 73. You might live till 93. You might live to 103, even though your life expectancy is 83. And in fact, this is one of the things, in the book that we deal with, that we think it's poor practice in financial planning to assume that someone's going to live to their life expectancy, because chances are they're not. They're either going to die earlier or they're going to die later, and possibly much later. So annuities are a way of dealing with the risk that you might far outlive your life expectancy.
But I do think there is a bit of a disconnect between the models that we put forth in the book and maybe what people would be able to do in practice. So in the book, for many people, the optimal decision is that they would start to purchase annuities, at retirement. And of course, some people could be retiring, quite young. They could be retiring at, 55 or 60. In practice, often one must wait until, 60 or 65 or even 70 to purchase an immediate annuity, to have them available. And then there is, research that also suggests that for some people that it may actually be better to kind of self-annuitize and delay the actual purchase of that annuity until they are a bit older. So maybe a bit of a disconnect between what one may actually do and kind of what the pure life cycle models would suggest one do.
Are there any annuities that you can buy like in advance? If I'm thinking about like, I'm gonna want it to be paid out between the year of 70 to whenever I die, and I pay down now, which should make it cheaper for me because there's always a bet on me dying before I turn 70 as well.
But yes, there's a later life annuity, or sometimes referred to as pure longevity insurance. And so some people may choose to purchase annuity today, so the money has gone away, and maybe they're 65, and I'll use that as an example, and maybe they want that annuity to start paying out when they're 75 or 80. Those are available where you could purchase today for a lower amount for income in the future.
Yeah, and also there's the term deferred annuity, where you pay. Yeah, you can pay, well before the annuity actually kicks in.
Yeah. So people reading your piece, they're going to come across the term mortality credits. You should probably explain where that concept fits into what we're talking about.
Yeah, mortality credits is the idea that if I Tom was mentioning it earlier, right? How does an insurance company create annuities? They have a pool, and everyone in that pool is going to die at a different time. So the people that die early, that money is now available to the people that die later. So as a consequence, you get the rate of return that you earn on an annuity is going to be greater than what you would get without just a market return without an annuity.
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Right. I always think that Moshe Milevsky gives the best descriptions of, how does an annuity work? And, sometimes they refer to these as tontines. And I won't do his example justice in any way, shape, or form. But, I think he gives an example. So let's say that you had, let's say 5, grandmas, and they're all 85, and they pool their money together and invest collectively. But at the end of maybe it's, by the time they're 86 or maybe 87, one of those 5 people, one of those grandmas, will unfortunately pass away. But the money that is left, even though they're all drawing down some money, the collective money will now be financing the retirement of essentially 4 people. And then after another year or 2, that 4 will become 3, and that money gets left behind. And so those that are that continue to live, are benefiting from, the money that was put in by those that died earlier.
Yeah, you note that the mortality credits are part of what makes annuities valuable to investors who have wealth that they do not plan on leaving as part of a bequest. So that's a very important distinction that you're making between people who want to leave something for their children or maybe a foundation or something like that when they die versus those who don't. How do we understand that in the sense of where annuities fits in? Are they useful really only for people who are not planning to leave a bequest?
Well, it might be the size of the bequest. So some people may say, okay, well, again, I'm going to make this up, but maybe I've made it to 65, and I have maybe $2 million, saved, or maybe I have more than that. I don't know, and I want to leave, half of that to my heirs, and maybe let's say that's possible based on my low level of consumption. For the part that I don't want to leave, the amount that I don't want to leave to my heirs after I've retired, and that's the part that I want to lock in my consumption. That's what I should be using my annuity purchase for. But I wouldn't purchase more. The part that I want to leave as a bequest, I would not have annuitized those assets.
So in chapter 5, we illustrate this, how it could be optimal to use, if you have a bequest motive, you want to leave $1 million to your heirs, but you don't have $1 million to leave them while you're working. So while you're working, you buy life insurance. But you're saving, and then throughout your working years you save and you save and you save, and then you get to $1 million, and then you don't need life insurance anymore. All the money is now available to your heirs, and so but now I can switch gears, and I can take care of myself. Regarding longevity risk, and I can buy annuities. So the same person could buy life insurance during the beginning of their life cycle, and then switch to annuities later in their life cycle.
And that gets back to Lotta, that gets back to some of the stuff we talked about in our first session, which is part of life cycle finance, right? Is that I am trying to take mortality risk off the table when I'm younger and have a large amount of human capital. And then later in life, once I've stopped working, I'm concerned about outliving my assets. I want to take that longevity risk off the table, or at least a portion of it.
Yeah, I think that the combination that Paul talks about having both the life insurance and annuity in place, it's interesting because I think most people would intuitively think, which partly is how I think, that if I have all this money and I want to leave it to my children, whether it's an exact amount might not be as important as me being able to live off that money. So instead of buying this annuity, I should be just using that money that I could have used to buy the annuity and just live off that. And if that means that I do have some outlays that wasn't foreseen, it doesn't match kind of what I would have gotten from the annuity because I live shorter or whatever it is, then that is fine because I still have that buffer. Like I don't need that extra safety layer that annuity gives because I'm sitting on this amount of money. That would be if you're really targeting a very specific amount, like there's very low risk tolerance on the bequest.
Well, yeah, but you would still face the problem of longevity risk because, you don't know how long you're going to live.
Yeah.
You may be thinking, maybe you have enough money. You say, well, I don't need annuities, assuming I can live to 90. What happens if you live to 105? What are you going to do for those 15 years? If you, and really the only way to avoid that risk is with an annuity.
Yeah, that's a great point. So those not leaving a bequest, then you say somewhere that 100% of savings of the wealth should be in annuities. Is that? It sounds like in my ears that kind of leaves out the possibility of like bigger outlays that might be unforeseen. I'll have a health crisis and I actually need 3 times the amount for a little period. Would you not always want some piece of saving that is just sitting there in an account somewhere that you can draw from, as opposed to only having the annuities?
You might, but it also might be worth it to buy insurance against those unforeseen expenses too. So you have to sort of look again. This comes down to price. How much would it cost me to eliminate, the cost of some future health problem, paying for some future health issue in the future versus, saving the money now.
But I'll just say we don't really get into it, but as Paul mentioned, there's a whole variety of insurances that people would typically buy. Whether it's auto insurance or home insurance or fire insurance or flood insurance or health insurance or long-term care insurance. As your question brings up, right? There's a variety of kind of unexpected things that could be quite expensive, and again, that is often why people are buying, insurance. And again, I guess if we bring it back to longevity insurance, people, face the idea that they're going to run out of money because they live too long. Well, if that's a risk that you are concerned about or worried about, you can take that off the table as well.
So when it comes to life insurance, then you do hear people saying that we generally underinvest in life insurance. People should have more life insurance. There are 2 purposes that we might, crudely, of life insurance. As we mentioned, leave a bequest. I want somebody to inherit this after me when I die, and that's kind of the purpose of it. Is there ever a purpose to apply life insurance for me when I'm still alive? Because I'll take the money out with a little penalty. But is that ever part of life cycle advice to get life insurance in for a specific other purpose having to do with the person still being alive?
So again, Paul, so there's different flavors of annuities. There's different flavors of life insurance, and the type of life insurance that the life cycle models are typically dealing with is term life insurance, where for a given year you would decide, how much insurance do I need this particular year if I were to die within this year, and you were just simply buying that term life insurance. I know there's a variety of other bundled products that are, partial life insurance with investments. Again, what we're talking about is, I'll call it pure term life insurance.
Yeah. So in theory, I mean, we think in terms of term life, but insurance companies do have other products, and like this whole life, which combines life insurance with a savings plan. So, as I mentioned earlier, like if you're trying to get to $1 million in savings to leave for your heirs, then, what you do is you save, and as you save, you buy less and less life insurance, term life insurance. Whole life basically combines the two vehicles together, the term life, with the lower and lower amount and with savings. So you're both saving, and so over time you have less term life and you have more savings. The problem that you might run into is you really have to look at the numbers very carefully and ask the question, what rate of return is this is this whole life policy actually going to pay, versus what can I get, without the insurance company, just going to the market.
Yeah, I mean, it really goes to the point too that when you have your model is very comprehensive and there are a lot of things going on, and when you're talking about annuity, life insurance, by necessity, you have to pick like a very like inbox one standard thing to put into the model, when in real life, when people can apply this, there is more flexibility in the kind of instruments that are out there that you can use, to your point.
Right. Earlier you brought up, kind of the idea of maybe a newly minted, PhD, and they would have, a large earning potential. And let's assume that they were 30 years old. They have a, high amount of human capital, and maybe they have small children. This is the type of person that would say, to protect the well-being of my family, and my giant asset, my human capital, as a result of my hard work through the PhD program, I'm going to, purchase, an amount of life insurance. But as you work, over this, let's say the next 45 years, right, you're going to be converting, you'll be saving money and building up your financial capital. And as each year kind of goes by, in general, the net present value, or maybe I should say the mortality weighted net present value of that human capital asset will become, smaller and smaller. And in order to provide for your loved ones, you'll be able to do that with potentially your financial capital, and they'll be less dependent on you needing to lock in, if you will, or protect the value of your human capital asset.
No, it's fascinating. I think I hope that the takeaway from this conversation, very much from our viewers here and listeners, is that it might seem complicated, and there are a lot of things to consider when it comes to lifetime advice. But to your point here recently, it is about lifetime advice, and it's all about how your savings and human capital changes over time. We're talking about a balance sheet, but of course that balance sheet is not static. It's going to change a lot. So there's always going to be new parameters. Like the parameters are going to change, I should say, and therefore the tools that you may want to apply is going to also change over time.
Yes.
So with that, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me today. There are a lot of tools out there. There are a lot of intriguing questions to resolve. Don't miss our last conversation on this piece, where we're going to wrap it up all for you and bring it to you like a nicely baked cake. So thank you so much for listening. This has been the Financial Thought Exchange podcast. I've been your host, Lotta Moberg, and with me was Paul Kaplan and Thomas Idzorek. Thank you so much.